So thanks, everyone. We'd like to call this meeting to order, the Thompson-Nicola Regional District's Policy and Governance Committee. And I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Jeremiah to do the election of chair and vice chair.
Thank you, CIO Hildebrand. As set out in the Local Government Act and the TNRD Board of Directors Procedure Bylaw, we will now carry out the election of chair for the Policy and Governance Committee. The successful candidate will serve in the position until the fall of 2026. Nominations will be called 3 times. As candidates are nominated, they will be asked if they consent to the nomination. Nominations will then be closed. If there is only one consenting candidate, that candidate will be acclaimed as the chair. If there are 2 or more consenting candidates, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to say a few words, if they wish, before the ballots are distributed. I will now call for nominations for the position of chair. Can you use the microphone, please?
I'd like to nominate Dale Bass, please.
I'll second.
Director Bass, do you consent to the nomination? Director Bass consents. Second call for nominations for the office of chair. And third call for nominations for the office of chair. I declare the nominations closed and Director Bass has been acclaimed chair. Congratulations. Okay, so we will now carry out the election of vice chair. So nominations will be called 3 times. As candidates are nominated, they will be asked if they consent to the nomination, and nominations will then be closed. I will now call for nominations for the position of vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Lee Morris, please.
Director Morris, do you consent?
Second.
Director Morris has consented to the nomination. Second call for nominations for the office of vice chair. And third call for nominations of the office of chair. I declare the nominations closed for the office of chair, and Director Morris has been acclaimed vice chair. Congratulations.
Thank you. And congrats, Lee. I'll try to always be here for you. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district. And today we're located on the Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD truly appreciates the partnership that we have with Tecumloops and respects the territory and land on which we gather today and where we're holding our meeting now. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? Motion to approve? Do you want a motion to approve the agenda, Marnie? I've lost track of how we do it now.
It's not required. Thank you.
Marvelous. Minutes. Minutes from January 23, their draft.
Move the minutes.
Moved by the Chair Roden. Sorry, I'm just catching up. Moved by Director Roden, seconded by Director Morris. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Reports. You want something?
I do. Just a question. When we're in committee meetings and the front is sort of with chair, should I be relocating myself to somewhere just off the side? Does that optically appear weird that I'm sitting here?
Well, I'll just ignore you, that's all.
That's a great question. Thank you, Director Middleton. It's not required. You're more than welcome to sit there if you'd like to.
Just poke me.
It's your designated seat anyways. Thank you.
Just wanted to check. Okay. 6.1 Board Expense Policy Discussion. Who's leading this? Okay, go for it.
Good afternoon. The board expense policy is policy number 1116. It was attached with the agenda package. We did get a couple requests to have a discussion at this meeting regarding the expense policy with specific attention to section 3.1. Section 3.1 says that the most economical mode of transportation is to be used unless there's specific practical reason to choose otherwise. This is most often rather simple in terms of making a decision, because when we look at conferences in Calgary or Ottawa, the most economical mode of transportation is a flight, because mileage to drive 5,000 kilometers is not economical. So that decision becomes quite simple. It becomes a little bit more complicated when we're looking at decisions to drive or fly to Vancouver or Richmond for conferences. The paragraph in question includes an example such as if the drive is longer than 3 hours, it may be more practical to fly than to drive, even if it's not more economical. Hope that made sense. So just wanted to put it forward to the board to say, is there enough clarity in this paragraph for the board of directors, or do you wish to have a review or a change of language? For staff, we think it's sufficient in terms of we're trying to encourage the economical choice. And then there's that flexibility there where it is practical to not choose the economical choice. That flexibility exists in the policy.
Discussion, Director Laird?
Thank you. This came up at our last, when we went to Richmond. And unfortunately, the cost of the airfare was over the $500 that's allowed. And it wasn't really the director's fault or the staff's fault. It just didn't work. So I don't know how we address that because I know Mike Grenier usually would have driven, but it was the winter time and he didn't want to drive. So I don't know how we address that. So whether we need a policy change or if it can be a one-off where we go to the board and ask for the repayment of the extra cost. I think it costs an extra $200 over and above the 500. The flight to Vancouver and back was $700 evidently. So I don't know whether we want to look at it being a one-off and have the board approve the extra expenses. That's the background for that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think that's good background. That was the scenario when we look at travel from directors' homes. I mean, we're a broad regional district, so some directors would be within that 3 hour. But if there are other practical reasons, they can be discussed. And if there is a discretion between what staff might feel or the director might feel is practical, the board can always come back and make a one-off decision, as with anything else. So yeah, I think that addresses the question, the scenario. The mileage to Vancouver, I think, was around $450. And at that time, the flights in question were $900. So it was kind of twice as much money. So we're, it is kind of funny when we get close to that mark on the line and we're looking at economics, but the practicality of it sits there as well.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Bass. The only other consideration for the committee to think about would be if a number of people all of a sudden wanted to fly, we would certainly not have the budget to cover it because we plan for mileage typically. And if flights were in fact twice as much, then we just need to make sure we're planning accordingly or coming back to the board for just a kind of special approval from a financial standpoint.
Director Hall.
Thank you. Just wondering about the timing. I mean, if we're going down to the LGLA, we know the dates, we know the times, and it seems to me anytime I've traveled it, sometimes if you book closer to that schedule, you're going to incur that $900 cost versus if you book 60 or 90 days out, it might be relatively cheaper, probably within $450 or something like that.
Yeah.
CEO.
Thank you. And just to answer that one, this was a funny one because the LJLA was at the beginning of February. We were waiting for the New Year's budget because we were already out of money from the previous year. So that was the thing where we need to be more proactive that way, and we can do that.
So then I have a dumb question on this one. I don't drive in the winter on the highway. Would that be something that, should I actually ever go anywhere on the TNRD down to Vancouver, and it happens to be in the winter, would that be a consideration that you would take into play? Because I'm old and I'm terrified to drive in snow on the highway, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think we would. I think that's where that example in the policy that says, for example, flying may be preferable to driving where practicable and reasonable. So the wording in the policy is what is practicable, what is reasonable. And I think that's where that flexibility lies.
And Director Thorpe.
Well, maybe it could be something as simple as, in this example, maybe you could reference winter driving conditions. Because if you've got a situation where it's kind of the same, like that 3-hour thing, but you've got bad conditions, it's gonna take you 5 hours, but how would you normally say that? So if you maybe worded in winter driving conditions, that might, yeah, safety concerns. Thank you, that's the word I'm looking for.
So with that, maybe I'll leave it with one final question. If we're going to revise the policy, is there any other feedback that must be addressed by Board of Directors on the board expense policy that you'd like to include in a review of this?
Director Middleton?
Just a question then, because not all of us have the luxury of living beside the airport with no additional travel costs incurred to get to the airport to take the flight. So in a case where now a director is coming from an out-of-town region to drive to the airport to catch the flight to go to say like to Vancouver or wherever it is the mileage to get to the airport still a claimable expense? Or do we take into consideration the cost of the flight? Is that like, is that something then we're still going to incur both costs?
You would in some regions, absolutely. So it's the eligible expenses from the director's home location. So that's why we have that to the place. So in some instances, it is a combination of mileage and air flights. Absolutely. Yeah. In most, like.
Oh, do we have someone on Zoom? I didn't even notice. Oh, Director Smith, sorry about that. No one told me you were up there.
That's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Can I ask a question?
No?
Oh, I'll sit
Go
here
ahead.
quietly then.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Robin. Thanks.
It may have already been in the report. I might have missed it, but I'm just wondering, just talking about expenses, whether members that attend a committee meeting that they're not assigned to, are those expenses covered for members that attend a committee meeting that they're not assigned to?
I'm trying to think of the answer off the top of my head and I may not have it. I think for members attending committee meeting, expenses are not eligible if you're not a part of that committee. I'll add a further statement that's maybe tangential to the question asked by Director Smith, is the idea that we do need to revisit the remuneration bylaw, because this has come up in the different context of how do we provide remuneration for external committee participation. And our remuneration bylaw does require review every 2 years. So it will be coming forward to the board for review again this fall. And that will have a little bit of discussion around external participation in committees. Yeah.
Okay. You good, Robin?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks. Any other questions? So you're
One, but a different.
different topic. Okay. So you're going to bring this one back to us? Okay. Oh, Director Laird.
Thank you. Just for clarification on the changes to the wording, including like the safety issue, would it still, you'd still have to come back to the board if it's over the $500 travel allowances and get approval?
There is no $500 travel allowance. So what we do is we look at the reasonable cost of flights at the time of planning for the trip. So that's where that $500 came into play in this conversation specific to LGLA, was an evaluation of flights at this point are costing 500 or the mileage is 500. That was where we were getting that. It's not a set 500. We're always looking at the cost of mileage compared to the cost of a flight. So there is no 500 max. It's always an evaluation of cost of flight versus cost of mileage. I hope that answers.
So that means it would, whoever, if it's over the amount, you'd still have to come to the board, or would staff approve that expenditure? I guess is what I need to
I
ask.
think it depends then how we update that language to say if it's practical, reasonable, and safe. That would be the addition of that feedback today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then we'll get that one back sometime. Moving on, 6.2. Communications policy 1.2.4.
Could I go back? I've got.
Oh, you have something other?
I have something on this.
Oh, on this?
one,
Okay,
but
go ahead.
yes. Can I just ask a question? And I'm pretty sure I remember us having discussion about it. And I just would like, not really a revisit, but just a little bit of a shall we say, and that would be on 2.4 and 2.5, which is if someone has to cancel or not be able to attend, and we sort of have it exclusively as due to the death of a family member, sort of written down, but then it would come to board if there was some other reason. Is that a bit sort of restrictive, or I don't know if that should be broadened a little bit to include maybe a few other scenarios? I mean, that's kind of like a bit of a hard line. And there can certainly be many things that happen in people's lives, either to themselves or to family members, that is just as devastating as death. So but I thought we had a discussion. I can't remember exactly how it all rested down to this as being the wording.
CEO Hildebrand.
If I remember right, and Amanda can help me with this one, but I believe the previous board, when we were working through this change in policy, talked about this, and they were pretty adamant about, if you say you're coming, and this would be an exception. But there's exceptions that happen all the time with medical, for example. Director Houghton couldn't attend and we needed to make a change because of a medical issue. So yeah, maybe we need to broaden that somehow and just make it a bit more flexible. But I think the point back in the day was, if you say you're coming, and there's no kind of excuses that are frivolous. But if there's a reason, there's a reason. But certainly I think we should probably look at that.
Thank you. Yes. And I just wondered, and I don't know how often it happens or how much. I mean, obviously it could be overridden or approved by the board that the expenses wouldn't need to be repaid because of an extenuating circumstance, but I didn't know if it made it a little bit of gray area where one person might be exempted, but then the next person might not be, just depending on, I don't know. I just think it's a little bit of a hard line.
Yeah, we can soften that. And then when we bring that back to the board for kind of final approval is when we can kind of firm that up.
Director Morris.
Thank you. It is one of those tricky situations, for sure. The concept of carpooling doesn't always lend itself well to some folks, but I mean, that obviously is one option in terms of putting all of the great electoral area directors in a car together and sending them might be useful or not. No giggling allowed. So the practical reasonable is an important thing in that carpooling, if we can. I guess, and we don't have any sort of external reasons. So the only other question I might have, I'm looking straight at Chair Roden. It puts the staff as well as some of the board members in a tad of a difficult position. You're going to be saying, I can't cram into a vehicle for this, that, or the other reason. We don't want a carpool. Somebody wants to leave at 7 in the morning and somebody else doesn't want to leave till 10, . So I'm wondering, Chair Roden, if rather than ask our senior staff to be sort of caught, would that be something that if we ran into a situation like that where it's a conversation, maybe even a difficult one, that we would defer to you to make a decision? Is that an option?
Are you talking specifically about carpooling? Or
I'm speaking in general, I guess it doesn't sound that way, about how we transport ourselves to meetings that we need to be at, whether collectively or individually.
I mean, certainly in the village of Ashcroft, we do encourage people to carpool if possible. And we have had instances where that has worked out for 2 or more parties. But as you say, sometimes people can't be, like, say for UBCM, most of us go down on Sunday. But maybe someone can't go down till Monday, or maybe someone has to come home on Thursday instead of Friday. So the policy in Ashcroft, it's not really a policy, it's more of a, we encourage people to consider that as an option, but recognizing that people live very different lives and schedules don't always adjoin or line up, I suppose. So I think that would be up to the people who are considering carpooling to see what works. And we certainly wouldn't say to someone, well, sorry, you know, you were offered a chance to carpool on Sunday and you couldn't go down till Monday. So, you know, we're not going to penalize someone for that because we all have lives outside the TNRD. Most of us do. And, and so we certainly don't want to penalize people just because they are unable to, say, avail themselves of a carpooling opportunity.
Director Middleton?
Not wanting to drag this out by any means, but I wonder if we start adding things like carpooling into the language, if we expose ourselves to liability for the responsible conduct of drivers. I, quite frankly, am very picky about who I'll get into a vehicle with. I have to have a front seat. I prefer to drive or whatnot, but I think just if we start adding it into any kind of lingo and policy that we could be possibly setting ourselves up for repercussion on that. So I'm personally not in favor of having that language in there.
You could have just told me you didn't want to drive with me. That was, you know.
Didn't want to hurt your feelings.
Are we done with this one? Director Roden?
Just one thing, going back to the reasons for not being able to attend something you've been booked for after it's been booked. I mean, we do have the wiggle room of 2.5, you know, to obviously assess the situation. I know when this initially came up for discussion around a much bigger reimbursement of expenses for conferences discussion at the last board, you can start trying to write in so many different permutations and possibilities and exceptions that now it becomes almost meaningless. You know, okay, so illness. Well, how catastrophic does illness have to be? Who does it have to, who has to be ill? You know, if you're ill and can't go, that's fine. Well, what about if it's your spouse or partner? What about if it's a parent? What if it's a child? You know, if you try and incorporate all that into a policy, you're going to miss things, and then you're going to, well, okay, well, you allow this, how come you don't allow that? So I like being able to assess on a case by case basis. It doesn't come up very often. When it does, it usually is very clear cut. You know, it's just open and shut, absolutely. We will not be charging you because it was circumstances completely beyond your control. We just can't encapsulate all those possible circumstances in a policy.
Amanda?
I'll try and summarize what I think I'm going to do for everybody. 2.4, I think we can soften that last sentence. 2.5 remains as the catch-all. So what I can do in 2.4 is just simply refer to, in the case you can't attend, look to 2.5, which talks about reasonable, practical ways you can't be there. And I would agree, we don't need to add carpool in here. I appreciate Director Morris probably getting at the, you know, what are other ways we can encourage economical travel? And I think leave that to you guys to discern and at your discretion, do what's best. I think as staff, there is inevitably, you know, scenarios that are gray, and we will continue to do our best to kind of guide through them. And where it doesn't work, we will bring it to the board for your support. Yeah.
You're okay with that? Okay. Anyone else? Last time asking. Okay, let's move on to 6.2, which is communications policy. I'm guessing it will be Colton.
Thank you, Chair. Tried to put a lot of detail in the report. Came to this committee in January with probably, well, I think 20 was my count, but so close to 24 proposed policy updates and a plan for starting doing a communication survey to ask people how we're doing and what they like that we do and what they'd like us to do if they don't like certain things we're doing or want things different. So we got a reasonable response to that survey. It was 176 responses. For a survey that was broad, not for a specific area, you kind of expect lower turnout. For example, we did a survey in the fall for just South Green. If it's specific and if people are against it, you're going to get more engagement. And we did a specific survey that people were strongly against in South Green Lake in November, and we probably got about 90% of property owners returning a survey. So it's no surprise that we get a bit lower of a turnout here. We did our service and taxation survey and this time 2 years ago in 2023, and we had more than 1,200 responses for something that was a lot broader about what do you think about services you get from the TNRD and what you pay for them. Where this is, how do you communicate with us and what do you want different, if anything, and what do you like that we're doing? So it was a little bit more narrow in that scope. So I brought back, you'll probably see in the discussion part of the report, about six other changes to go with the near 2 dozen that was in the proposed updates for this group in January. So there's more than 25 policy updates now that are proposed in the communications policy. So happy to take any questions if there are any.
Questions? Director Laird?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know in my area, there's quite a few small, I guess you'd call them, communication groups. For instance, where I live at Nicola Lake, they have their own communication systems. They tell you what's happening in the region, in the subdivision. If they have any problems, like they just had a major sewer break and they had to fix it. So, and I know Lower Nicola also has a similar type chat line. I was wondering if there's any way we could, when we do our press releases, like, could you not include those particular in the group and just send the press release to that group? Because it's well followed and it's not a vicious, it's a good information that goes out. And I don't know whether we could look at possibly doing, when we have a press release that is something that we feel we need to get in directly to communities. I know there's about probably 150 people on the one at Nicola, and that I'm not sure how many are on their chat line in Lower Nicola. It's one of the major communication for that area. So is that a possibility? You think you might be able to get that?
Yeah, through the chair, definitely. Anybody can, I'd encourage anyone to receive our press releases or sign up for it if they want. You can do it on any page on our website on the bottom, but you can also just have them email me or call me and I can put their emails in that way. If you're talking about someone specifically in Nicola Lake, Director Laird, I'm familiar with more of the folks in Lower Nicola and the folks who run the community hall too. So I can double check if they're on our list too and add them, check with them and add them if they're not. I think that was probably my biggest takeaway or one of the biggest takeaways from the survey part of looking at this. Not necessarily a part of the policy update, but something I was already looking at was maybe more pared down email groups, like making a spot on our website where somebody can go and they say, I want to receive updates about board meetings or general press releases or emergency notices. And I want to receive it for electoral area M or N or B. I've noticed some regional districts do that. And I think that's a useful way to, it's just for me checking an extra or a different box when I go to send it out for people. Like the biggest thing for that would be say, like public hearing notices or development notices. Somebody says, I want to receive updates for my area. That would be a huge improvement for what we have now for reaching people directly with like email means for that. But yeah, just kind of improving that email system is something I was looking at. And one of the questions in there was about what's your preferred method of receiving information from the TNRD? And I forget what it was. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was close to 80% said email. So that was far and away the number one option. So Yep, so definitely get them in touch with me or let them know they could add their email on our website too.
I can get their address for you if you don't have it. And I'm pretty sure the one that Nicola, you have to be invited to be a participate. I think that's one of the only ones that I know that's like that. So I'll get the email addresses and forward them to you. Thanks.
CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you through the chair to Director Laird. I think you just clarified it for me, but I think when you're talking about groups or communities that talk on Facebook and there's Facebook groups, we need their permission in order to have access. And it's not just their email, but they'd actually have to accept us, I believe, to the group. So that's a bit trickier. So just to make sure that it's not just a simple email, it would be allowing us as the TNRD Facebook page to have access to share information to their Facebook page. So just keep that in mind.
And you'd have to get them to agree that they want that information, otherwise you wouldn't be invited in. So I'm pretty sure they would, and it all depends. You, like you say, Colton, you can have a list of what you want to get notices of. And I don't think you want to do the amount of that we actually put out in a month. There's so many different topics that probably wouldn't relate to some of the different areas. So, okay, thank you.
Director Roden.
Thank you. The Village of Ashcroft on our Facebook page, we frequently feature communications that come out from the TNRD. So we will put them on our Facebook page, the exact thing that comes out, just because we know that, that very often there are things that are of interest to people in Ashcroft and other people who check our Facebook page. So certainly that is a good channel. But yeah, I agree, you do need to either send it to the group administrator and say, hey, would you mind putting this up, or ask for permission to be a poster. But most groups, when it's coming from something like the TNRD, which is reputable, they're happy to do it because they do see it as a public service. Only not so much a typo as an omitted word. It's on under number 1.2, the fourth bullet point. It's the bullet point that starts, staff must ensure that their public comments. It goes, their public comments and representation of the TNRD are in accordance with Employee Code of Conduct Policy 7.112. There's something missing before ensure. It should be to ensure, in order to ensure, if you're getting paid by the word. And that was the only one.
Well, thank you for that through the chair to Chair Broden. There was one other one that I was wondering if you'd spot and you haven't found it yet, but so I didn't actually know this one was there, but we're talking about two different typos when we each found one. So now I got two corrections.
We have a recommendation. Someone want to move it? Moved by Director Thorpe. Seconded by Director Middleton. Any more discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. We're at 6.3, which is the procedural bylaw. Okay, you're up.
That's me.
Yep, you're up again.
And I have a brief presentation to share because unlike Colton, my report was brief and I will talk more. No. So board procedure bylaw, we have a board procedure bylaw. It was last updated in 2022. Procedure bylaws do include rules for how we conduct our meetings, how decisions are made recorded, how participants are involved, and how other meeting matters are handled. We have to have a procedure bylaw. It is the law. And the law actually articulates what some of the items in your procedure bylaw must state. And since it is a bylaw, we do have a process to update that. So this is our first step in that discussion with the board, to have a discussion at Policy and Governance Committee. We'll get your feedback here. We would bring back a proposed bylaw with new changes to a committee of the whole meeting this fall, and then follow through our public notice posting process to update the bylaw. There were a few discussion points that staff had noticed that according to best practice or different things have changed over time, we probably should update in our procedure bylaw, or we've had feedback from the board of directors that we'd like to make some changes in this area. So the report was quite quiet and just bullet pointed these subjects. So I thought I'd just speak to them briefly here and give you a bit of context on each one and then seek your feedback. So the first item was public notice posting place. Our current bylaw defines both the fourth floor of the Civic Building and our TNRD website as a public notice posting place. We would envision a revised procedure bylaw that only uses the fourth floor of the Civic Building as the public notice posting place. That leaves room for our website to be used as the alternative notice posting place in lieu of weekly newspapers in our region. So it just gives more operational efficiency to make that change. There's a section on delegation requests that requires we bring a semi-annual report to the board of denied delegation requests. To be honest, this isn't happening because we rarely deny delegation requests. So it's more of a housekeeping proposal to update this language to say the report would be annually. And at that token may not exist if there are no denied delegation requests. Best practice, lots of places are updating procedure bylaws in terms of the question period. That's covered in our current bylaw under section 19. We would recommend that we add some clarifications that questions should be related to an item on the current agenda. It's currently just an open question period. Another item is electronic participation. So currently we have two different sets of language, which makes it somewhat confusing for folks. Our current language permits members to participate electronically in 4 regular and closed meetings per year, but they're only allowed to participate electronically in 2 committee of the whole or committee meetings per year, which is kind of awkward because they're all adjoining anyway. So if you're unable to attend for the regular, you're probably missing the committee of the whole and the committee. So why are the numbers different? It just is a little bit confusing on that front. So we would recommend aligning them to the same number of meetings for committee meetings and regular meetings. Yep, question.
Oh, thank you. When you're talking about committee meetings, though, sometimes there's only 3 or 4 a year. So that could be problematic if they'd never show up. At least they would electronically, but you'd never see them in person. And that might be why it's there, just a thought.
Potentially, yep. Good thought.
I have a question. And it's informed by a motion I did at City Hall. It's difficult to find people to run. And when you require personal actual attendance at many of the meetings, that dissuades an awful lot of other people who might be interested. So do we have an appetite to even discuss allowing people to attend electronically more? At City Hall, I raised it largely because everybody seems to get elected is old. And we want to see more younger people. But given the TNRD situation, you actually have trouble finding some people. So I was just wondering if that's worth a discussion or not.
I think it's a great discussion for the board to have. Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's all I'm asking for. Director Laird.
Yeah, and I think we all find the same problem is when you're looking for somebody to actually run for election at the regional district. One of the constraints, especially for people that have lives other than the TNRD, as we've talked about, it would probably be able to encourage more people to run if they knew that they could actually just attend the meeting electronically and not have to spend however many hours driving and sitting in a meeting and then driving back home. I know that it would definitely benefit some of the people. It might give them the encouragement to become an elected official. It is quite discouraging, the age that we're looking at. It seems most people are self-employed or retired that run for the position, and see if we can find some younger people.
So then I'll bring that up at a committee meeting. noting that the TNRD is the size of a small country. And we'll have that discussion from there. Is that okay? You guys are good with that? Otherwise, I would move it right now, but we should have a discussion. Excellent. Amanda?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. That's perfect. One small note under electronic participation that I would like to clarify is our current procedure bylaw does require that the presiding members, so the chairs of committees, are here in person, and we do find that is more effective in terms, but so that would be, I mean, it's just staff recommendation, not the end all be all, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, if somebody wanted to be chair, they'd have to understand that as well. Another question. Sorry about this. I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to. Did we not pass something about not zooming in from overseas?
I'll have to look into that. I'm looking, Marnie's making the same face as me, which says perhaps, but not at the front of either of our minds. So let us take that one away and we can have that conversation maybe at the committee of the whole when we make some further recommendations. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I just remember some people talking, some of the directors talking about security issues. Okay, any other questions from anyone other than me? Director Roden.
Do we have anything in place to ensure we don't have any journalists from the Atlantic listening in on any of our discussions, or? No, sorry. Just regarding the electronic participation, I think we do need to have a discussion. We're in a different age. We have capabilities that we didn't have even 5 years ago with COVID when it started. I just think we do need to preserve a balance, because I can see people who would take advantage of loosening to never show up. And I also have been in Zoom meetings where it has been, or I have observed people in Zoom meetings where it is obvious they are not, shall we say, giving their undivided attention to the matter at hand, the matter for which they are being paid. They are clearly doing something else. And if you're here, the idea is that you're focused on the meeting. And then again, as we found during COVID, by far the best conversations and discussions come when people are face to face in the same room. It is never the same. And in fact, I know people who, if they were here, would have questions and comments that they would not hesitate to voice. On Zoom, they are silent as the grave. And I don't know whether that's because of the limitations of technology or am I on mute? You have to unmute yourself. I don't know. I don't know. Many people find it an artificial barrier, and I think it does hinder and impede a free and frank discussion in some cases.
So what you're saying is when I raise it, we're going to have an interesting discussion.
It's going to be very interesting.
Thank you.
And hopefully everyone's here in person for it.
Oh, did you have-
CAO Hildebrand and then Amanda.
Just one comment, just from memory, I'm thinking back, we did have a couple occasions over the last number of years where I think there was a director that perhaps zoomed in from vacation because they wanted to be at that meeting, but then there was also a discussion that they participated in a closed meeting, and that's where it came from, where we didn't want people to be sitting on a veranda somewhere in a closed meeting. So we'll take that back and bring that forward.
Thank you. Amanda, did you have something?
I was just going to continue on to the next point.
Go for it.
Debate and conduct. This is a section in our procedure bylaw. I am not necessarily thinking there's a recommendation to be made around changing it. Just wanting to flag it, as we have had conversations with the board of directors about committee conduct, the code of conduct. How do we procedurally manage that in meetings? Our current language says that members speaking must adhere to rules of procedure established under bylaw and decisions of the chair and the board in connection to points of order. That's the current language. It may or may not be sufficient given what the board wishes to do, if they wish to revise that or change that in any way. Yeah.
Questions? Nope. Keep going.
The last two exciting points, committee appointments, more of a housekeeping item because we actually have a gap where we're not talking about how does the chair make appointments to external committees. So we need to add some clarity there and just tidy up that language as a recommendation to the group. Final point that has come forward is committee participation. And this is just one, again, I don't think there's necessarily a change to be made, but a clarification that our current procedure bylaw has this language. says members of the board attending committee meetings for which they are not members of allows them to take part in debate or discussion with permission of the majority of the committee members present. So that's our current procedure bylaw. I would, I think, recommend leaving it as is. I don't see anything jumping out at best practice or other reason that would see a need to overrule that, but flagging that for the group. Those were the points.
Any discussion? Director Middleton, then Director Laird.
Can we just jump back to the previous slide there and when we're doing the committee participation? And I'm a little concerned that that starts to become possibly who likes who and who disagrees with this, or what run-in somebody might have had with somebody in the past and that. So I'm a little uncomfortable with just leaving as it is, where it becomes discretionary. And I think that as committees, we could be possibly sort of viewed as being I'm going to say not impartial, and then how are we going to stick handle our way through that if we've got, you know, some board members, oh yeah, sure, come on, and then the other were saying, well, no. So I would like to see that be a little bit more cut and dried, where they're welcome to view the meeting, but not to participate with comment and questions, so forth. And just my thoughts. That's where I kind of stand on that one.
I have a speakers list, but I'm just going to say I agree completely with you. Director Laird, then Director Roden, then Director Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do agree with this, where the committee should actually allow the person to speak, because that's what it's saying right now. So it would actually be the committee deciding whether or not they want the input from the person that is attending and not on the committee. I think I think that works. Because now we don't, if there's a person in the room, they just put their hand up and speak like they're part of the committee. They don't actually ask permission to speak. And I think that's important. It might also make the person think about what they want to ask, if they have to ask permission to be in the discussion. That's just my opinion on that one. The other one is, how do we follow Robert's rules in every board meeting, or is our policies and changes to meetings, does that still follow a lot of the Robert's rules?
Yes, we still follow Robert's Rules of Orders. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Over to Director Roden. And yes, Director Kelly, Director Hall, I know about you.
We know about you. I mean, I'm kind of torn on this. On the one hand, I like the idea of just having a blanket policy where no, it's the same across all committees, because otherwise you're going to have this committee that allows people to speak and this committee that doesn't allow people to speak. And then in 2 years, when the committee changes, now the committee doesn't allow people to speak. I can see the benefit. Director Rantis springs to mind. He is not a part of the Solid Waste Committee, but I could see that if maybe something came up before the Solid Waste Committee and he were present in the room, he might have some valuable input to make based on his experience as mayor of Cache Creek and with Waste Tech and with the landfill in Cache Creek. So he would probably be worth listening to in that instance. And if we had something blanket saying, no, he can't, then I don't know. It's so there's things to be said, I think, on both sides. But I think whatever we do, we have to be able to make it across all committees just for consistency's sake. Otherwise, you'll have people showing up at one committee and not able to talk and showing up at another, and then they can. But then in 2 years, when that committee changes, no, they can't. And it's a dog's breakfast.
Director Morris.
Thank you. No dog's breakfast, I hope. This one, I guess we're almost sort of to the end of the meeting possibly, but in any case, it's kind of more of a forward thinking that I've been having, and this is around succession for future board members. And we've all got alternates. And I'm not, this is just a general comment about the future, about what we might be, want to be thinking about, is where can we engage the alternates a little bit more other than zotting them into an emergency situation because a board member's not there? And how do we maybe develop succession in terms of who comes forward? So it's nothing urgent. It's more, we're in committee of the whole, and I'm simply musing about the strength of who comes behind as well. So, and it, allowing, in some sense, we were just speaking about who gets to speak. Do we in fact engage the alternates on occasion in our meeting with us, like a committee of the whole, so that they're getting a sense of the larger picture as well, and possibly in that way we're grooming the future as well. So that's just me thinking that might not be useful at all. Thank you. Director Hall.
Thank you. Thanks. I think whatever way we decide to go, I think consistency is the best application. The other thing that I think about is, I mean, if you're interested in a committee, like I'm interested in governance, I'm interested in finance, so I put my name forward and I was fortunate enough to be selected to be on that committee. If directors are interested in being, on the committees, then they should do so, and put their names forward. I also think that as directors, when, agendas go out, there's an opportunity for everybody, on the TNRD to review finance committee meetings, notes, governance. And if you have questions, get a hold of Tricia. She can maybe, pose a question on your behalf, because I do think, and I find with this system, the interference sometimes that you get, and it is interference that you get from people that don't sit on the committee, okay, can be very distracting. And I would be in favor of saying, okay, yeah, if say Mike Grenier wants to talk to me about finance, absolutely, let's go for a cup of coffee and let's talk about the agenda. And if he's got some good points, then I can bring them forward, as a committee member. And if he wants to sit in and make sure that I represent what he's saying is proper, by all means, I think that's right as well. But I think if it's a committee, we should have committee voice. It's just my thought.
Director Thorpe.
I'm kind of in agreement with Director Hall. I think that we should all be able to sit, like come and listen, but maybe not speak, because it is distracting. You could do as he says, or potentially there may be, if you're sitting in that meeting, then they could potentially ask you if they know that you're, like, let's go back to Director Ranta. If we were in a solid waste committee meeting and he was sitting there quietly and something came up, perhaps then somebody from the board could say, hey, what's your opinion? And so, but that way they're not interrupting the flow. I do know, though, that some people, sometimes you want on a committee and you don't get on that committee. And so that can be frustrating too. So we need to find a balance. And maybe the balance is, just like I said, if they happen to be sitting there quietly, somebody could say to them, hey, I understand you used to sit on this committee, or I know that you have experience. Would you like to say something? And that would be up to the chair potentially. How would that work?
Anyone else? My opinion, having chaired the finance committee, it depends on the director as well. I mean, we can have any rule we want, but if you have one director who's super duper keen and thinks they know everything versus somebody who's more quiet, it doesn't work. So I agree with you that I think Director Hall has the right idea there. And your point is well taken. The chair can ask anybody to show up, I would think, within reason under the bylaw. But if we were going to discuss something on the rural area of Lytton and you were not on a committee, I could ask you if you wanted to attend. Yeah. So there's good discussion here. In the end, it does come down to the enthusiasm of the director. Speaking of enthusiastic directors, Director Roden, did you find a typo?
No, I did not. Director Morris, I don't know if you've been following the discussion around the possible amendments to the Local Government Act and Community Charter regarding regional districts. There was a 4-hour presentation from Don Lidston of Lidston and Co. a few weeks back. I believe it is available publicly. We are all being encouraged, even if you weren't live at that session, if you have thoughts on this, there is a very extensive survey that is going around. I believe the link was sent out a couple of times. Yes, Corporate Officer Jeremiah, I think, but someone sent it out to us recently. And the subject of alternates is something that was discussed a lot by Mr. Lidston during the presentation, because regional or electoral area district alternates is something of a poorly defined gray area, and that's putting it mildly. I mean, certainly when you were the alternate for Director Rothenberger? Yes, and you were assiduous at coming to meetings as a guest and sitting in the gallery and listening. And I mean, certainly if any EA director has someone who is keen, whether it's your alternate or someone who's maybe interested, certainly encourage them to come with you. But I think where it really gets into that gray area is if, for example, you are incapacitated for some reason, your alternate will come to these meetings, well, to TNRD board meetings. What happens, what is their status if there is, for example, an emergency in Area P? Now, in a municipal government, obviously, if I'm incapacitated, the deputy mayor takes over. The deputy mayor is one of my counselors. He or she was duly elected by the residents in the village of Ashcroft. Your alternate was not elected. But now suddenly your alternate, how much power do they have to represent you who were elected? That's the big amorphous gray area that they're trying to kind of clarify, because you could potentially have an unelected person making very serious and very far-ranging and far-reaching decisions. So it's definitely, if you didn't have a chance to see, I believe the 4-hour presentation was about 5 weeks ago. I believe it is available. The link is available. It's certainly worth listening to. Don Lidston is always worth listening to. And some very, very good points came up in the discussion. I know it was also subject at the Richmond meeting in February. So getting a lot of traction, I think they say. Also, just a quick question, 9.2. Regular and special meetings. I was rather surprised to hear this after 3 and a bit years as chair, that the meeting shall be adjourned no later than 3 hours from the scheduled start time. I had no idea. So who knew? Obviously not me or anyone else in the room, I guess, or no one reminded me, or maybe we just haven't had any go over 3 hours. So I don't know, does that need to be there? Does it serve a purpose? Do we need to change the time limit? Is this just me being nitpicky?
That's a great question. We'll look into that one a little bit more. Yeah.
Director Laird?
I know the Merritt City Council, if they had a time limit, and when we reached the time limit, it was put to a vote whether we continued or not. So the board actually decided how long the meeting would go. If it was over the 3 hours, the elected official would decide whether they wanted to continue with the discussions or not.
Anyone else? Good discussion. Thank you.
I just have one other
Go ahead.
question. I thought I read somewhere where your alternate could attend so many meetings a year with you in a meeting.
Alternate participation is discussed in the remuneration bylaw, I think more detailed, because I think they can attend, I didn't pull it up. I can send it out after. I think they can attend 1 or 2 per year to be with you and remunerated. And then in addition, they're remunerated when they're replacing you. So it's in that section that it's talked about.
So there is the opportunity for your alternate to come. I can't remember. It's either 2 or 4 times a year. It's not that many. To just, if you want, if they're looking at actually stepping into the job, they can come and get the full flavor.
CAO Hildebrand, then Director Roden.
Thank you. Just a comment, because I know this has come up multiple times, is when an alternate does come in and take over the place of a elected official. they need to carry the view of that elected official, and that many times doesn't happen. And so I just need to figure out, maybe, is that something we actually have to write into the procedure bylaw, or is that more just it's just a comment for the committee to consider, because that's happened over and over again, and staff are kind of, we can't manage that. So.
I think that goes back to the type of alternate. I have Director Roden, then I have you, Director Hall.
Just, I know we are going to be talking about the question period. And maybe looking, right now, there are no limits on what people can talk about. They can ask about anything in theory. I'm kind of the opinion, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we so rarely get people coming to question period anyway. And I think that we're all well accustomed or prepared to say, if people go, ask about something that was 2.5 years ago, we don't have that information at our fingertips or to hand, but we will certainly get back to you. Please, see someone and leave your contact information. The other thing was about a quorum and attendance at committee meetings, 31.2. And this is the about the same section as if you're not a member of a committee, but you're there as a guest, can you speak? It does say above that, the board's chair, which I take to be the chair of the board of the TNRD, yours truly for the time being, when in attendance may be counted as one member for the purpose of constituting a quorum. I found that again very interesting. And when I was going over this one evening at home, because that constitutes a fun night at the Roden household, I read it out to my husband and said, do you think this means what I think it means? He said, yes. He says, does that mean you get to vote? And I said, that's a really good question. So I'll be able to tell him yes, obvious. Okay, thank you. We have rip-roaring times at our house, I'll tell you.
Director Hall.
Just back to the alternate CAO Hildebrandt's. I mean, if it's one individual that we're challenged with, I think we need to deal with that individually rather than set policy. I just think that for the most part, from what I see, when I see alternates here, they're very respectful, and they are getting a full blush of what happens. But if it's one individual that's trying to dominate and has an agenda, I think it's up to us to manage that.
Anyone else? We're good on this one? Thank you. New business. Anyone have new business? Motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Hall. Thank you. We're adjourned.